The recording has started. So, yep. Good morning or good afternoon, or good evening, right? Depending on when you are watching this recording, right? So, welcome to the module, History and Theory of Architecture, right? So, today is week 1. So, I am your lecturer. I'll bring you guys through this module. Yep. And we met previously in last year, year 1, 12 HPD, right? So, okay, history and theory of architecture. What we're going to run through today, right? Firstly, an introduction and overview. Then we'll be running through the interface for Brightspace and probably where to find the information and the assignment structure, right? So okay, so for the first week, okay, the point is that for all the classes, right, they will be face to face, right? But this is the first week, so I'm an adjunct lecturer, right? So unfortunately, I have a prior appointment which I can't reschedule, so I have to do this recording. Okay, so next week we will meet in class, face to face. Okay, we'll talk about that later. Okay, history and theory of architecture, introduction and overview. So the learning platform we'll be using Brightspace. Okay, so there is a weightage for participation, right? So in a form of questions that will be posted on Brightspace, right? That requires you to watch certain resources and maybe answer some questions, qualitative questions, right? Most of the time, getting you to think a bit and to formulate certain opinions, right? Which I think is actually the one of the most important things for this module, right? To learn how to observe, to digest the information in an objective manner, and to formulate your own opinion towards certain things, right? So there will be this discussion forums, submission folders, all on Brightspace. Okay. So maybe we can run through. Okay. Okay, I think we should run through the Brightspace interface first. So okay, this is an interface that will be kind of similar to us, right? If you go to content, okay, under module information, okay, you can reference the teaching plan. So I'm going to open it full screen. Okay, hang on. Okay, I can zoom in this manner. Yep. Okay, so this module itself, right, 4 hours per week, right? 4 hours per week. It starts it's on the Friday, right? Friday morning. It starts from 8, 9, 10, 11. That's the timetable, right? But when we meet face to face, we will start at 9 in class, right? So we'll meet at 9 to 10, 10 to 11, 11 to 12, right? 3 hours. Okay, so there will be 1 hour. Okay, the first 1 hour, right? Okay, what I mean is that the first 1 hour, based on the timetable from 8 to 9, right? That is for your participation in the discussion forums, for you to prepare your presentations or for you to discuss among your group mates, or for you to work on your assignments, right? So there will be that asynchronous portion to that, which effectively means that when we meet on a weekly basis, it's from 9 to 12, that 3 hours. Okay, 9 to 12. And that asynchronous hours is for your own planning. Okay, so you can plan to have it before, after, the day before. I mean, it's up to your group to decide. or you as an individual to decide. Okay. So, okay, that's the first thing. Okay, in terms of schedule, okay, activity-wise, usually I break it up into two parts, the first part of the SEM, second part of the SEM. So the first 8 calendar weeks actually form the I would call it the first part that accumulates with a collage, the submission for the collage assignment, which is 15%, right? Then you go for a term break, and then you come back. The second part of the semester, you accumulate in journal submission, right? So if you scroll down further, this is the way that the assignment weightage is organized. Okay, so just now I mentioned there is a collage assignment, right? So assignment, there are two. The first one is a collage, the second one is a journal. Each of them is 15%, right? Individual work. Okay. Then projects, there will be 6 case studies, right? Case studies come presentation. So each of them, the weightage is 5%, right? Total 6 times 5, total is 30%. Okay, this will be done in a group setting. And the group setting, okay, we have around 24. So it will be 4 groups of 5 and 1 group of 4. Right. So I'm gonna drop the name list into a randomizer, right, to generate the groups. Okay. So I understand students, you probably by now you should have your own clique. Yeah, you should have your own clique. So it's a pros and cons thing, how do we group up? Okay. So there are benefits to working within your clique. There are benefits to randomizing as well, right? But for this module, usually I try to randomize because so that you can learn from your peers, right? There's always things to learn, which you will kind of miss out if you keep working within your own clique. Okay, so that's the way the grouping is going to be done, randomized. Okay, so there will be 6 case studies. You'll do a case study and you'll present them, and it will take place throughout. It's distributed throughout the semester. So as you can see, right, the first 3 of them will be the first part of the semester. After you come back from the break, you will do the next 3, 4, 5, and 6. Then for coursework is individual work. There will be 10% for forum participation, right? And there will be 3 worksheets. Each of them is 10%. Okay, so what I mean by forum participation, right? Okay, let me see. How do I minimize this? Okay, it is cross button. Okay. Okay, if you go to Brightspace communication, discussions, right, there will be this thing called the discussion forum. Okay, so okay, this is what we did for past years lah. So I will update it accordingly. All right, so this is where you come and do your forum discussions. So the point is given for participation, right? Going through the process, going through the material, formulate your own thinking, and answering it. So I don't think we have yeah, I think all the posts should be refreshed already. Yep. So okay, the point is this is where you find the forum discussion. Communication, under discussions, you come here. Then depending on how we set up the topics, right? Last year we started from week 1, right? I think this year I'm gonna start from week 2 onwards. So certain questions like what is architecture to you personally and to the community in 10 canoes, which is the content you're going to read for week 1. So these kind of questions. So just formulate your own thought and come up with a response, right? And the point will be given, right? There won't be the point will be given based on participation, basically. Okay, then, okay, let's go back to the teaching plan. Yep, then there will be 3 worksheets. The worksheets are also distributed throughout the SEM, right? The first worksheet 1 and worksheet 2 will be the first part of the semester before your term break. And after you come back from the term break, in the middle, towards the end, in the middle actually, you will submit the worksheet 3, which has something to do with modernism and colonialism from a Singaporean perspective, from the perspective of Singapore, lah. Right? So the assignment are like all spaced out, right? So please manage your time. Yeah. Do your own planning, manage your time properly because you have your studios. And yeah, you have studios, you don't want to. Okay, the main thing is that try to finish all the work, right, within the week itself. Right? Remember I was saying the first hour from 8 to 10, that is actually asynchronous. You can plan, you can do your own planning, right? Try to settle everything, right? You can see that the deliverables are distributed throughout the semester. So try to settle everything, right, within a week and close it up. Right? Don't let it pile up. For example, if you are okay, for example, for the collage assignment, I think we're actually asking for like six collages, right? Depending on the brief, lah. I can't remember now, but 6 collages spread throughout 8 weeks. Okay, so you can do your own planning. I can do 1 collage every week, right? Or I can do 2 collages every bi-weekly. Then I can close it. Then maybe for the last week before the submission, then I'll just tidy it up. I see what I want to update before I submit. Right? Don't leave everything to the last minute. I was a student before, right? And this module has been running for quite a few semesters. So one thing I observe is that students will just leave it to like week 7 or week 8, then they start working on a collage, which is pretty scary, lah. Right? So please don't do that. Try to space out all the work. Then you can find that it will be manageable. Okay. Yeah, I think that's about the schedule. If you have any questions, right, just drop me a note. Okay, I'm going to go back to the introduction slideshow. Okay, so okay, discussion questions. Okay, always go back to Brightspace for the latest information, right? Because every week I will do an announcement. Yeah, we did 12. Oh, we did 12 HPD last semester, lah. By the time it might be a bit messy because of some administrative issues. But I think you are familiar with Brightspace. So what I'll do, right, every week I'll be making announcement on Brightspace of what to expect for that week, right? So when you look at the lesson plan, use it as a reference, but along the way, right, there might be adjustments because sometimes um previous semester, some of the classes, there are peak periods, lull periods during studios, right? So sometimes we have to do some compromise, or sometimes we have to work around it, right? So okay, the point is, please pay attention to the latest announcements on Brightspace, right? And then you use the lesson plan uh, as a guide and as a reference, right? That sets out the general direction. Two assignment, semester, 2 parts to it, right? There are three case study for the first part, 1 assignment, 3 case study for the second part, another assignment, right? And then there are individual assignment that's spread out, two for um two for first part of the semester, 1 for second part of the semester, and then you have a participation um weightage, that spreads out throughout the entire sem, right? But the point is that please pay attention to Brightspace. Check in on a weekly basis to stay updated. And once you have identified any issues, right, any potential issues, just reach out to me, right? It can be scheduling or it can be certain clashes like within the week itself, or you see that happening like 2 or 3 weeks in advance, just drop me a note. All right, then we can see how to best manage it. Okay, let's see. Yep, so discussion forums, discussion is 10%, it's mentioned, right? Submission folders. Okay, this will be open only for scheduled times. Okay, scheduled timing. For example, in the discussion forum within that week itself, right? I'll just open it up for that week and I'll close it. Same goes for submission folders, right? If not, the thing about discussion is that if you don't schedule it within a time frame, right, then students won't do it lah. So pay attention to the time frame that you're supposed to participate in the forum discussion. Okay, all this will be spelled out. Okay, so kind of discussion questions as mentioned just now, right? It can be something generic. Most of the time, it's something generic because if you think about history, right, it's very open-ended lah. All right, so it's up to you as an individual to acquire the skill to formulate your own understanding of it. Okay, so like, let's take a step back, right? Think like, what's the purpose of history, right? Think about it, and then just write down your answer as a participation in Brightspace. Okay, so this one, I think this can be a question for next week, right? In the meantime, you're just think about it. Later, I will share some perspective, right, which hopefully can benefit you all. Then you can think about it. Things like, what is history and how does it benefit architecture? Yep. So actually, what happened in the previous semester is that we asked this question, right, to get you guys thinking, and then you write down your answer, right, and then we'll go through the content itself, lah. Yeah, which now actually I'm trying to test out, just sharing a bit first before you guys start to think about it and formulate your own opinion, right? We'll see which is the most useful for you. Okay, so generic questions like, what is architecture? Right, consider the question, write down your answers on Brightspace forum. Okay. So okay, let's do those are the administrative bits. So okay, this is a pre-recorded session. So if you need to take a break or whatever, just pause, right, and take a break and come back to it. Okay. Next up, we're going to talk about introductions, some ideas, right, to consider. As the title goes for this module, right, is history, theory of architecture. Okay, so quite simple. You just think, what is history? What is theory? What is architecture? And how does the knowledge of history and theory affect architecture? Okay, so what is history? It's basically a knowing or learning via inquiry or an account of someone's inquiry. That means someone has inquired, and he or she has recorded as a narrative. Right, so how do you make sense of that information? Okay, so if you go through all the various definitions, to inquire, historia, it means a wise man. To know, to see, right? To see, to know, right? So what then is history? Formulate your own thinking, okay? Think about it. So what is theory, right? It's a form of contemplation, speculation, a way of looking, a way of viewing, right? A form of speculation, maybe, right? A kind of consideration, a form of perception, right? So there is no one very clear definition of what is theory, right? Depending on the background that you come from, right? It might mean slightly different things, right? But the important thing for you, right, as a student, is to then think about and quantify for yourself what is theory for you, right? And what is architecture? So I think we talked about this briefly last year. What is architecture actually? Have you all thought about it? Right. So if you trace the the roots, right? In a Western sense, you go the Greek way. So you trace the beginning. It's a beginning and a tecton, right? So actually, in translated, it means boat builder, right? And remember, I think we were talking about archi and tectonic last year. So the idea and the technical know-how to give form to the idea, right? So the idea and letting that idea appear in form. Okay, so that's from the Western perspective. Throughout the semester, you will find that actually the Eastern or the more the Oriental or the Southern perspective, they are quite different as well. So very interesting lah. So for you all as a student to know the different perspective, right? And most importantly, to arrive at your own definition of what is architecture. Okay. And the beautiful thing about architecture is that you can keep looking. Yeah, it's like open-ended. Yeah. So even for me, like I'm okay, technically still a student. Because there are always new things to learn. But okay, since I left school, maybe I can put it that way. Since I left school, it's like you can ponder the question of architecture and yeah, till now, it's still a very interesting question to ponder. Yep. So the history of theory of architecture explores generally Asian and Western architecture, right? It excludes South America, excludes most of Africa, most of Australia, Pacific, and colonial northern North America, right? So yet defining Asian and Western architecture is not without challenge, right? Because, for example, if you think about Asian, maybe the word Asian, right, to you now is like, okay, the Asian countries law, like China, Japan, you know, Southeast Asia, thereabouts. But if you investigate the origins of the word Asia, right, is actually more like it's more like a verb, right? To It means to go out, to rise, right, in reference to the sun, right, i.e. from the east. Right, that's why when you realize that if you refer to Asian countries, right, it's those that generally you would think about countries the in the east, from the east, right, because they are associated with the rising sun. Okay, so okay, the image on the left, right, this is the Akkadian Empire, which is 2300 2315 BC, right? That's a long, long time ago, right? So it originates in the maybe around in today's context around the Middle East, right? Arabia, Asian Minor, right? The Persian Gulf, right? Surrounded by this area. So that is a location of very early civilization, right? And so with this place as because we are talking about east west, right? It's actually relative, right? Depending on where you are, right? So from the position, right, of this Akkadian Empire, the east, right, will be where the sunrise, no? And then the west will be maybe parts of Europe, so on and so forth. Yep. So that is like the sun, east west. Um, yep. So some ideas to consider, like what is Western, right? It means in or towards the west in a westerly manner, right? It can also mean in Latin it's like evening, west, nightfall, right? And it can be also there's also a kind of directionality to it, like literally the direction in which the sun sets, right? So now if you think about east and west now, right, you can kind of visualize the sun rising and the sun setting, right? Whereas it's quite different from nowadays if you just look at mass media and then you think about east and west. maybe you have a different perception of East-West. I'm not sure. Okay, so the words, okay, ideas become words, right? So the words, right, and thus ideas used to define the history and theory of architecture, they are Greek and Latin in origin, right? Because conceptually, architecture is actually a Western concept, right? So we will use the words to expand our definition of what constitute history, theory, and architecture, and if possible, to challenge the established definitions and conceptual boundaries, right? So because if you architecture is a Western concept, right? It originates in Greece, yeah, and in the East, right, throughout the course of the module, you realize that actually there's no very clear attempt to like classify architecture, right? They allow things to be kind of in a flux, or they kind of manage that chaos in a less structured manner. Okay, but we will borrow this Western concept of architecture, right, in order to help us define this very, very, very broad body of knowledge, right, called history and theory of architecture. Oh, so in terms of Asian architecture, right, you realize there's no canon. You don't have like if you think about the West, right, it's like, oh, there are, Le Corbusier, 5 points of architecture, right? Then there are Vitruvius. Did he write the 10 lamps? I can't remember. But yeah, but there's a 10 lamps of architecture, right? All right, and there, yeah. So if you think back, then you think, oh, Frank Lloyd, okay, not Frank, Mies van der Rohe. Then you think before that Vitruvius. Then before that someone else. So there is a kind of finesse in the way they record the histories, right? But there is no such clear histories in Asian architecture, right? In fact, there's very little writing on architecture from the Asian perspective, right? So does it mean that there's no recording of history? There is no theory in terms of a canon? Does it mean there's no architect and no architecture? Right? That's for you to ponder, right? Because uh, does that mean there is no architecture? Or actually there is, but it's just not classified? Oh, think about it. So the approach for HTA will be informed by the meaning of the words themselves. Inquire, perceive, let appear, right? You turn to the east and turn to the west to begin this inquiry of the world, right? Um, just to simplify things, right? The world is more complex than just east-west, right? But we got to start somewhere. So actually, one of the interesting things, right, about east-west is that you can learn a lot of things if you look at the east from the Western perspective, right? And then you look at the west from the Eastern perspective. Yeah, that as a starting point, right, will give you quite a bit of interesting observations. Yeah, which is, I think, one of the nice things about our position in Singapore, right? Because it is you're kind of balancing the east west, so you have the benefit of both. So you can look at it from this lens, right? And then you can also look at it at the other lens, right? And then you see whether you can come up with something new and how we can reshape the future. Okay, so history and theory is a subject that focuses on inquiry and interpretation. So you have data, right? And you analyze that data, right? And you classify the data and to communicate it, right, if possible. That's why you see the case studies, right, and presentations is spread out throughout the semester, right? Although the weightage is like just 5%, right? But it's a very good it's a very good place to hone you hone this skill of, because when you do your research, there's a lot of data. So how do you group them? How do you present them? How do you talk about them? Right? So in the previous semesters, because there are 6 case studies, 6 presentations, right? So usually from the first one until the sixth, there is marked improvement, right? So that's a very nice thing, I think, about this module, because the students will work and improve from case study 1. Maybe 1 is not they didn't do very well, right? But they will just keep improving because they see what their classmates have done, right? And then they see the comments, and they learn from their peers, right? And within the group itself, they develop certain synergies, right? So I would say that towards the end, right, all the case study presentations are generally quite well done. So and this okay, just to digress a bit lah, like, because this skill of inquiry, of interpreting data, and to in a creative manner and present it, right? It's something that's very important, I would say, when you are working in the real world, right? Especially in the context now, right? When you are facing so many things that can be automated, yeah, so many things that AI can help you with, right? So very important question is then to consider, like, us as a human worker, right? What can we bring to the table, right? When AI can, take away so many of the jobs, right? So what is unique to us as humans? And I would say these are some of the very important skills. Okay. So we'll be looking at traditional typologies, right? A lot of generalization, right? But we will trace the traditional typologies. We'll look at ancient kingdoms, right? Then we try to form chronological connections, right? Which is quite helpful, like this BC, how many, and to understand the events in history that led up to the formation of certain ideologies, right? We'll look at philosophical ideas, religious concepts, right? And it will be Singapore focused lah, because we are based in Singapore. So at the start, right, we'll look at all this information, right? But towards the end, I think the later part of the okay, not the later part of the semester. Towards the end, we'll be focusing a bit more on Singapore, right? And when you're doing a case study, there might be some of the examples, case study examples that is Singapore focus, right? So, yep. So what are we expecting to learn, right, from each respective week, right? So now is week 1. We do an introduction, okay? So this image, this is a Padang, right, from Scandal Point. This is 1851. From this painting, right, you can identify certain elements that you can still see today from the Padang, but most of it is quite alien, I would say, right? Alien, not that alien if you are versed in our own history, right? But if you look at it, this picture, and you compare to maybe a photograph of the Padang, or you make a trip down to Padang and then you stand, at the edge and you look at it, it's very different, right? So what has transpired? How has history, what events have transpired, right? That led to the difference between that painting and what we see today. Okay, so okay, give me a moment. Sorry, there's a phone call. Okay, so for the sharing for this week, we will also be talking about indigenous worldviews and the Southeast Asian house, right? Which is basically a building for a harmonious relationship. Okay, so here you can see hand stencils at a cave in East Kalimantan, right? So supposedly done like 21,000 years ago. Yep. So 21,000 years ago, I think there were no language, right? But there were human beings were already starting to make marks in their own way, right? So this mark making is an important act throughout history. Okay, week two we'll be looking at Hinduism, right? The world of the gods and the world of mankind. Week three we'll be looking at Buddhism, all right? A narrative basis for architecture. Week four we'll be looking at Taoism, right? Talking about absence, emptiness, silence, right? Week five, we'll be looking at Confucianism, harmony and order, right? So quite interesting actually this module because especially when you're talking about Asian architecture, right, Eastern architecture, um, a lot of times I find myself like talking a bit about society and the human being, right? Because it's very hard to understand why they do certain things in a certain manner if you don't understand their perception of what constitute a human or the model human. All right, week six, we'll be going west to ancient Greece, ancient Rome, right? Dealing with cosmology and order, right? So you'll be very interesting because in the weeks prior, right, you are looking at Asia, right? Then when you go west, right, you find that oh, actually the perspective is very different. Oh, week seven, we'll talk about Christianity, okay? Order, light, body of Christ. Okay, what are the historical events that transpired and how did they inform architecture? Right, because now, I mean, if you think about Europe, you think about churches, right? Wow, then you think, wow, there's so many beautiful examples, and it's really magnificent. How did they build that? Um, because in a modern context, it's kind of impossible to recreate those kind of churches, right? Because the society is really functioning differently. Oh, so we'll talk about that. Very interesting, lah. And week eight, common test week. So supposedly no lecture, no comment because no HTA has no common test, no tutorial. So I think for this period, just focus on your assignment, right? There should be assignment due for the first part. Just work on that and there'll be term break for 2 weeks, right? So this is ice cream sandwich, Singapore, early 2000s, right? So maybe if you think about relaxation, yeah, maybe in future, right, this will be an artifact of leisure. I don't know. Just kidding. Yep. So after the 2 weeks break, come back. We will be working in some e-learning, right, whereby you would just consult the material on your own, or there will be pre-recorded lectures, like today. Okay. And or we can do I think during COVID time, we did some virtual excursions, which was quite interesting as well, right? Nowadays it seems like there's less of such resources, right? But I think we will try to see how we can work some of these virtual excursions inside, right? Yeah, I'll think about it, right? Maybe even for case studies, right? We can use virtual excursions. Okay, but the details, I think we'll work on it, right? So stay updated. Stay tuned to Brightspace for the updates. Okay, so Islam about spatiality, temporality, geometry. Okay, week 10, talking about Renaissance to Enlightenment, right? Cosmological bridges and scientific visions, right? And okay, journal. This is the first time we are meeting face to face after the break, right? So this will be the launch of the journal assignment. Okay. Week 11, we'll talk about Enlightenment to modernism, right? Reasons and aesthetics. Okay, so week 12, we're talking about colonialism, territories of control and conflict. And 12B, talking about Singapore modernisms, right? I think there won't be any guest lecture, right? So I will just be covering the material. Right, so you can see how they the topics have transited. You know, we're looking at the East and West, we're going back in time, right? Then after that, we look at, as we move closer to the modern period, right, we also zoom in closer to Singapore, right, to understand the background of the context. Week 13, we're talking about modernism as a concept, modernity, modernisms, right? Notice it's plural. So what does it mean for like Southeast Asia? Like this is a version of Indonesian modernity in Bandung. This is like in the 1930s, right? So is this different from how is it different now as compared to say a version of modernity in the US? So interesting things to consider. Okay, week 14 we'll be looking at postmodernism, right? The postmodern and some concluding thoughts. Okay, week 15 as well. I think usually the submission of the journal assignment I'll probably leave it to the last week. Yeah, but I think it's quite simple. So okay, it's quite simple if you plan for it, right? So please do your planning and do the work, clear the work week by week. 15, no lecture tutorial, where you can by right you can focus on your assignment, wrap it up and submit it, right? But please fall back on Brightspace, right, for the schedule and the lesson plan for the schedule. Right. So in terms of assessment, I think we showed this just now. There is 30% case studies. All right. There are 6 case studies, 5% per case study, right? Spread throughout the semester. So use every case study and every presentation, right, to as a chance to step up the quality of your presentation. Okay. So in the group, right, everybody should speak, all right, during the presentations. Right. This is to hone your presentation skills as well. Okay, so 30% this will be group work. Right, so the first half will accumulate, there are 2 assignments. First half will be a collage assignment, mainly images, right? And then second half will accumulate in journal assignment. Each of them is 15%. Right, so journal, as the name suggests, it will be a mix of images and writing, right? Usually a bit more writing. Okay, so there will be three worksheets. Each of them is 10%. There are 10 canoes. You have the Malay house. I think you have the Singapore monuments as well. Yep. But basically 3 numbers. Stay tuned. I'll publish more details when the time comes for the worksheets. Okay. And the last 10% given for participation, right? As mentioned just now, right? It will be Brightspace, forum discussions. Okay, so please participate. You just participate, the point will be given. But of course, don't go and write gibberish or nonsense, lah. Right? Go through the effort of going through the content and formulating your own response to that. Okay, some references. If you're interested, you can check it out. Okay. Okay. Next, we'll do the sharing of the content for this week 1. Okay. The indigenous worldviews and the Southeast Asian house. Okay. Yeah, so once again, if you need a break, just pause the video and go for a break, right, and come back. Okay, this is repetitive for participation. Right. Probably there's some changes to this, so always just go back to Brightspace for the latest updates. Right. If there is a forum discussion for that week, right, I'll also make an announcement on Brightspace. Right. So basically just go to Brightspace for the latest updates, right? There'll likely be discrepancy between the notes and Brightspace, because the Brightspace is more updated, right? And the notes sometimes we make changes along the way. Okay. So look for instruction on Brightspace. If you are not sure what to do, right, just write into me. Right. Usually I'll try to collate and do a summary of the queries and in the form of announcement as well in Brightspace. Oh. So content for this sharing overview, looking at indigenous worldviews, 10 canoes. 10 canoes is worksheet 1. Then we'll be looking at Southeast Asian vernacular and the Malay house. The Malay house is worksheet 2. Yeah. So the image itself, this is from Tasmania, Australia, 14,000 years old, right? Apparently, right? So the mark making. So if you look at a piece of rock like that with engravings and marks, So the question is that what do they stand for? What do they mean? Okay. So indigenous worldview, right? Okay, you can try to pronounce this. It's quite interesting. Ranta, Palawa, Milai, Tina, Nika, right? So this language is Palawakani. It's a reconstructed language based on up to 8 different languages present at the British invasion of Tasmania, Australia in 1800s. Okay, so what does this phrase means? It means this country is us, and we are this country. Yeah, and so you can see, this country is us, and we are this country, right? They don't see them as separate from the soil or the land that they are living on, right? Which is very different if you think about. I mean, I'm Singaporean, so um, from maybe when I was very young, there is still a certain connection to the earth, to the ground, to the land, right? But I would say okay, so this is my personal opinion. It's like, because I noticed for the previous classes, some of them some of students, unfortunately, is like, because they grow up in apartments and it's very dense. It's a dense city like Singapore, right? So the connection to the land probably is not that strong, or they felt that it could be stronger, right? And for other students from other countries joining us, right, they do see the difference, right? Which is a beautiful thing about diversity, lah. The different opinions and experiences. Okay, so sorry, I digress a bit. So coming back to this phrase, right? Um, this slide itself, you notice that, okay, the first interesting observation, right, is a reconstructed language, right? Um, there is no unified language before the British invaded Australia in 18,000s, right? It's all the natives, right? And then they were living um, organically lah, with their own language, and they are able to communicate, and importantly, they are able to live, right? And they are able to create their own culture. Okay, so this is a map of Australian indigenous countries of land, right? So to get a sense of scale, right, the small island of Tasmania to the south, right, is 98 times the size of Singapore. Yeah, so just one small island in the continent, right, is 98 times the size of Singapore. So for a landmass, right, of such a size, with so many different tribes, right, possible to get uh is it possible to like standardize them? Yeah, that's a question. And you notice that actually, um okay, one observation, hopefully the students will arrive at, you notice that actually, classification and organization is quite a Western perspective. Yeah, and to the Oriental philosophies, right, actually the need to classify is not that important. Yeah. Okay, let's try to visualize what I'm talking about. Okay, for example, yes or no, right? If I ask you a question, you'll be tempted to answer, right? You think about it, then you will say yes or no. Oh, but you realize that this dichotomy, right, is very Western. Yeah. So if from the Oriental perspective, right, if you ask them, is it yes or no, they might say maybe. Yeah, like yeah, it may be like no yes, no, no yes, no, no, right? Maybe somewhere in the middle. Yeah, so that's kind of more Oriental actually. Yep, which was I'm trying to illustrate the point I'm talking about. Okay. So the original inhabitants, okay, back to this slide, original inhabitants were those who originate from a particular place. And in the case of indigenous Australian, that origin is both the beginning of time and also the beginning of country. Okay. However, for the indigenous Australians, even the ideas of origin, time, and beginning are not accurate terms, right? So the creation, right, of all things, they call it the dreaming. And right, the dreaming is I always think of it as a very romantic term. Okay, the dreaming, and it's ongoing, right? It's the past, the present, and future, and there are no boundaries between them, right? It's continually presenting without the boundaries and territory of modern or Western thought, right? The past is present, and dreaming is timeless. So, if okay, for the indigenous Australians, right? For example, if in today's context, right? If I'm sitting here, I'm still part of the dreaming, right? There are no boundaries between past, future, right? Everything is a flux. There's no beginning and no end. And time is continually circular and it combines all times. Oh, so yep, that is their worldview. Okay, likewise, right, the spirits that they believe in are not bound to the earth or time. They can be creating, they can be present, they can be a present person, they can be a spirit place, right? So was and is, they actually mean the same thing, right? So was and is like part of English language, right? Yeah. So if for the indigenous, right, probably is and was, right, is maybe just one term. Oh, so dreaming can be the time before the present began. This one, okay, you can read this, but the thing is that it can be the past, the present, and it's linked to the particular. It can be linked to the particular community, just one person, maybe an object or a certain place, right? So the spirit ancestors enters a baby's body at the moment that the mother realizes she is pregnant, right? So the location where the mother is will be the spirit place of the child. The child's dreaming and the spirit ancestors will always be linked to that place, right? So a very strong link to the land that they come from. Okay, so the dreaming was before the present age, right? Where the ancestors wandered in a featureless land. Because if you think about the landscape of Australia, right, it's kind of like plains, right? You can be looking at like the horizon, and there's very little features, it's just flat. So unlike the people of today, ancestors have special powers and were associated with certain animals and plants, right? And were often both man and animal. Yep. So because they are not they don't stay in a particular place, right? They journey over the land, right? And along the way, they created the forms of the landscape through their actions, right? And they shape rivers and mountains. So they're not stationed at one place, right? They are always uprooting themselves and traveling and settling down, uprooting, traveling, settling down. See, so the descendants of these ancestors occupy the land in the present, but the creative forces that shape the land continues. The knowledge about how to interact with the dreaming, how to be within the world, is passed on through stories. And these stories present a vast body of indigenous knowledge, culture, history, religion, science, technology, law, family trees, etc. All right. So if you there is a video to watch as part of today's session. If you watch it right and you observe their ways of living, or the way of functioning, you realize that it's very different from what we are used to, right? Firstly, because of the time, because it's that was 7,000 of years ago, and it's a different place, right? So it's also interesting to understand the difference, right? Which will be part of the thinking that you go through lah for worksheet 1. Okay, so the person and the land or country cannot be separated. They are one unit. Okay, so And the country, right, the land itself is alive, right? And the spirit, there is a spirit to the land. Yeah. So if you tell them like, um, they will struggle to understand, the our local perspective. Like, if you think about the Singapore perspective of land, right? Or maybe because I'm in practice so long, you think about, you would think about things like boundary, plot ratio, how dense you can build up, uh, usage of the land, right? So these are very scientific, and very money-making terms, right? So but for them, all these are of no interest to them, right? The land is just alive, and you have to respect that spirit, right? Because the respect spirit, respect life, respect the country itself. Okay, so living within the land is then the one of relationship between spirit to spirit, relative to relative, the child to the mother. So, in order to understand, okay, this is coming from a former Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Justice Commissioner Mike Dodson. Right, he says that to understand the law, the culture, and the relationship to the physical and spiritual world, everything must begin with the land. Yeah, everything about their society is woven to the land. Right, so the culture is the land, the spirituality of the Aboriginal people, cultural beliefs, or the reason for existence, right? It's all tied to the land. So if you take the land away, right, they have no reason to exist anymore. Okay, so it's very powerful and very romantic worldview. So we have grown that land up. We were dancing, singing, and painting for the land. Right, it's really a love and a connection to the land, and they are celebrating the land. So if you remove this land from them, they are literally removed from themselves. So what it means is that, for example, if there are this tribe of people, they're living there, right? And in the for city planning, maybe because I zone that area for certain usage, right? So I need to take that land. Then I will because I need to take that land for a certain development works, right? We have to relocate these people. So you might give them very beautiful houses, nice sanitation system, right? Give them like shopping centers, very nice views. But to them, it doesn't matter. Yeah, it's like they have kind of lost the meaning for their existence because a very big part of their existence is tied to that land, right? That they are being uprooted from. Oh, so the land is central to understanding. Sorry, I tend to digress because the information is like quite interesting actually. I know it's dry to students, but it's actually quite interesting. So I tend to digress, but yeah, let's move on. So the land is central to understanding, right? So let's just try to move on. Okay, so indigenous art, right? In the form of like painting, rock carvings, dance, song, storytelling, body paintings, etc. It's a way of passing on cultures and stories, of communicating important aspects of the dreaming, right? Often specific to a place. And art is present as part of daily life, all right? Of the extension of the way that they live, the cultures and the religion, the society. So it's like it's not detached from daily life, right? It's part of daily life, right? And it's an accumulation of the body of knowledge, right? That builds up living like day to day, right? A way of communicating through song, poetry, carving, and paintings. Okay, so there is no secular life. Yeah, everything is sacred. Everything is spiritual. If you think that if you offer them a scientific, if you offer them a scientific perspective, right? I mean, they might accept it out of respect for your own perspective, lah. But they won't believe that there is no spirit. Yeah, because everything is linked to the spiritual realm, and nothing exists separate from it, including humanity. Everything has a spiritual connection and connotation. Okay, So next up, we have the 10 canoes. This exercise, you can find the link in learning materials. So it's a very short film now, broken up into parts. So I think you're supposed to watch part 4, right, in the link on Brightspace, right? But if you're interested, you can watch the others as well. Right. So this film, 10 Canoes, tells the story of a group of people, sorry, Aboriginal tribe who live in far northern Australia. Right. So the film is set in two parts. There's the ancient past, which is black and white, and the very ancient past, which is color. Okay, so the ancient past is the context of the traditional goose egg hunt in the swamp. So this is a historical time, 1,000 years ago. The very ancient past is after the dreaming and the big flood. So this is the time of the ancestors more than 40,000 years ago. Oh, so these people were semi-nomadic hunters, hunter-gatherers. So every season they move um, from boundaries to boundaries, depending on available food. Oh, so the concept of boundary is very different for them as well. They have a very complex kinship system, right, which determine extremely strict marriage rules, a highly developed system of law, and an extensive trading network with other tribes great distances away. Okay, so they have trade links. They have trade links, so they don't need to rely on like cryptocurrency or even like notes and coins, right? At that point in time, it's probably like barter trading, right? They will accumulate resources, right? And then they meet other tribes and then they will trade. It's a barter trade. So maybe a fish for your, okay, because they are near the river, so they have fish, they have pearls, they have sea cucumber. Then maybe the other group came from the mountains. Then maybe they have the metals. So they trade a sea cucumber for metal, right? And then they will use the metal to make knives. Yeah, so uh it's just what is required for their lifestyle, right? So the concept of money is not that important, or maybe it's just absence, it's just absent, right? So Western culture didn't reach until the 1880s, right? And when it reached, right, it was strenuously resisted. Oh, so from the 1930s onwards, a peaceful Yokna Belanda lifestyle has been the norm, and a mixture of traditional and modern life is practiced, right? So there are at least like 50 years, 50 years of unrest before things settled down, right? So understandably so, the Westerners will come and then say, oh, I'm bringing this culture to you, right? This is good for you. Yeah. Then if you are native, right, you think that we are living well. So what's the problem, right? We are living one with the land. So there's a clash of ideology, right? So it took half a century before a kind of balance can be achieved. Okay, so this one I'll leave it to you to do as part of the exercise. Okay, 10 canoes. Okay, this one you can do it as part of the exercise. Okay, it's a tribe, it's a network. Notice there are no buildings, It's just about humans, their relationship with the land, and their relationship to one another, and the relationship to the spirits. Okay, so in the traditional world, everything is imbued with mythological and spiritual significance, right? And no event can be considered to happen by accident. So one single event can signal that the ancestors are unhappy and that things are out of order, right? Then they might change the perception because order must be maintained at all costs. Also, everything is linked, and um, it might be a small occurrence, right? But depending on how they interpret it, right, the entire universe can be at stake. Right. So the ancient Greek thought that philosophy had a special power, when captured in the narrative form. So both Plato and Aristotle devoted particular attention to the power of the narrative in their works. Okay, the Greeks believed that watching a play, right, whether a comedy, a tragedy, or an epic, has a special transformative power over the viewer. It could literally change them, and it would have an impact on their souls, right? So in this case, it's the same case that we see in the film Ten Canoes, right, where the elder tells the young kid a story, knowing that the story has the power to transform, to help him see what is right, what is wrong, to restore order, the cosmos, and to prevent widespread disorder. Right? It's a matter of, it can be a matter of life and death, lah. Yeah. So that is the power of storytelling. That's the power of narrative, right? A kind of similarity between Western thoughts and the indigenous Australian thought, right? They believe in the power of storytelling and the transformative effect on the viewer. Okay, so I think the worksheet you can download in your Brightspace. There are some questions to be answered after you read through the questions, right, and then watch the video and think about. There'll be some probing questions lah, that trigger your thought about man, technology, landscape, and modernity. Okay. Yeah. So the entire film itself is 1.5 hours lah. It's in parts. So I think for the purpose of the exercise, you can watch the part that is included in on Brightspace. Okay. So disclaimer: this film contains nudity, right? And graphic violence as well. And there are also certain jokes about male genitals, farting, and sexual performance, right? Which I mean, we might find offensive, right? Depending on our tolerance, but for them, I think it's pretty much part of their culture actually. Yeah, they were not so they were quite open about it lah, put it that way. Similarly for like Japanese ancient culture, they're actually quite okay with it, right? Yep. So a certain sense of level of maturity is required, right, to go through it objectively and think about it. Oh, so this will be worksheet 1. Okay, next we move on to the Southeast Asia vernacular, right? This is the okay. So you have the indigenous the indigenous worldview that accumulates in the 10 canoe worksheet, right? Next, we will talk about Southeast Asia vernacular, right? This is kind of linked to worksheet 2, which is the Malay house. Okay, so discussion about Southeast Asia architecture, right, historically has been shaped by the great kings and the great generals' view of history, right, which prioritizes some history over others. Right. So for example, there's the myth of the founding of Singapore, right? Okay, the myth of the founding of Singapore represents a wider myth of the superiority of a certain types of knowledge over others. The British Empire and European knowledge and culture over the local culture, tradition, and knowledge. Right? So history is always written by the winners or the victors. Right? That's why you can see, we just rewind a few slides, right? That when the British invaded Australia, right, it took up to half a century for things to settle down, right? And uh, the they came with the belief that I'm bringing something superior and I'm saving you, yeah. But for the locals, it's like we have lived here like since forever. So what's wrong with the way that we are living, right? So we need to access Southeast Asia architecture on its own terms, right? To consider what was important to the people who made the buildings and use them. We also need to consider the buildings themselves as a body of architectural theory and to set aside preconceived notions of what the buildings are. Okay, so 19th century European understanding shapes our reading of Southeast Asian houses even now. right? Where the environment and technology are emphasized over social, spiritual, or cosmological considerations, right? So before we go into the houses or into the local context proper, right, we need to take a few steps back to understand, because if you think about Southeast Asia or Singapore, right, Singapore is a racial country, right? So you have Indian, Malays, Chinese, Eurasians, right? All these things coming together. So in order to better understand the local vernacular on its own terms, right, we need to first take a step back and understand. That's why we will be talking about topics like Buddhism, Christianity, Taoism, Confucianism, uh, the Oriental philosophies, right? Because all these are linked to our reading of the Southeast Asian house. Okay, so what is Southeast Asia vernacular? It spans a large area of island and mainland Southeast Asia, right? The form of the vernacular timber house, raised on stilts with a large overhanging roof, right, is found throughout the region. And the timber house with flexible nailless joints fitted with mortise and tendon joints has endured in the region for thousands of years, right? So the consistency of architectural form across a large region suggests aspects of a shared society, cosmology, and culture, right? So these are grown organically, right? Nobody came here and told us what to do, right? This was developed in a very organic manner. Okay, so just look at the form, right, of the Southeast Asia vernacular houses. Quite interesting, because there are, if you look back, right, if you trace back history, this is a network of islands, right? Yeah, if you look at this map, it's like, okay, a network of islands connected by water bodies. So how do you travel from one landmass to the other? Using ships, right? So okay, not the ones. Okay, so I'm just to give an example to illustrate. For example, if you look at, okay, the rest not so, but if you look at the Toraja house, right, that form of the roof itself, does it remind you of inverted body of a boat, a vessel? Yeah, it's quite interesting, because for certain civilizations, right, you'll notice that it is very possible that, they travel from one landmass, they build a ship, they travel from one landmass to the other via that body of water, and at the other side, they don't dismantle. This is okay. This I'm just using this as a hypothetical example, right? Because if you investigate, there's a lot of technicalities involved. So if you flip the boat, right, I want to keep the boat, right, because I might travel again, if the circumstances change, right? So I can just flip the boat, and the inverted boat becomes a very good weatherproofing device. That becomes the roof of my house, right? And then I respond accordingly based on the materials that I have, based on the new land that I came to, based on the climate around. Then I build the enclosure under that roof, right? So there is if you look at the Toraja roof form, is like a inverted ship, right? For good reasons. Then of course there's the language of stilts, porous windows and walls, right? Those are driven and grown like organically. Okay. So architecture provides both shelter and also social and symbolic space, right? Architecture mirrors and molds the worldviews of its creators and inhabitants. And inhabited spaces are never neutral. They are cultural constructs and carry some symbolic loads in every culture. And Southeast Asia is no exception. The house is a microcosmos, reflecting in its layout, structure, and ornaments the concept of an ideal, natural, and social order. Okay, the house is a microcosmos. This concept. Okay. So which is consistent with some of the other lectures that we'll be covering. So okay, if you think let's take a step back. If you think about, okay, never mind. I think let's stop at we'll stop at the house as microcosmos. We can talk about that later. About the human and the relationship to the house. Okay. Basically, the house is a microcosmos, right? If you examine the way that you lay out the spaces, the structure, and ornaments, right? The concept of an ideal and natural social order is presented, right? So common in Southeast Asian architecture, as well as the arts, right? The concept of the center and the peripheral, the cardinal directions, the body, especially female or male-female opposition or harmony, and the village, right? Each of these concepts, right, interact and interplay, often in symbolic oppositions. So commonly used in the roofs of houses are the symbolic forms of buffalo heads and horns, boats, the naga or the water serpent, right, and birds, etc. And the process of building, particularly of the houses, is in itself governed by ritual, right? So, for example, if you nowadays, right, for example, if you want to build a new house, and then the client tells you that, oh, I need to consult, the feng shui, find a time for it, the master will come down and do certain ritual. You would think, or like, oh, it's a bit superstitious, right? Yeah, it's a common, it's kind of a common opinion, lah. Yeah, if you find someone going to that extent, but once upon a time, the process of building is governed by ritual, right? It's governed by this kind of belief system. It's governed by culture. So the building of the house is subjected to ceremonial cycles, and conceptually, the house is a series of fixed points in time. So the ideal house is therefore only temporarily realized, but should be strived towards, right? And houses are ritual centers for prayers, sacrifice, and feast. And important events are celebrated at the house, and thus the houses also functions as temples. Oh, so quite interestingly, the concept, the house functioning as a temple, right? You can that's why you find that in a lot of Southeast Asian houses there are altars for worship or for worship of the ancestors, worship of deities, so on and so forth. All right, so the sacred heirlooms are kept in the attic of the houses, and the roof of the house is associated with the spiritual world, right? The rituals of renewal aim to contact the deities and draw them down to the earth. So there is a model of a three-layered cosmos, or the world tree, which holds the three layers of the cosmos together, applied to the house. There's a roof, right? Roof is for the heirlooms, deities. There's the middle portion, right? The middle portion usually for living, right? Practical functions, and then there's the ground level, right? And we connect between these two with staircases. These three, sorry. So the architecture of the house, right, is the intersection of the visible and invisible worlds. While well adapted to the local environment, right, cleverly using locally available materials, the form and the variety suggests that climate, geography, and materials are limits rather than the determining factors of architectural form. Okay, so further, further the continuity of this building forms over thousands of years, and the materials themselves cannot last over 200 years, suggests that the form itself is symbolically strong and important. So um, in this photo, right, is the Ise Grand Shrine in Japan. Okay, it's rebuilt every, okay, not sure about 20 or 25 years. Since 7th century AD, right, it's rebuilt every 20 to 25 years. I can't remember the exact. So there are two shrines, If you go to the Grand Shrine, right, you find that it's two identical shrines side by side. Yeah. So the one of them will be rebuilt. It will be taken down, rebuilt every 20 to 25 years. Okay? Then once it's finished, right, people will visit the new one, and the previous the one, for example, the one on the right, finish is rebuilt. When the rebuild is complete, right, people will go and visit the one on the right. Then they start work on the one on the left, right? So this is very symbolic of the Japanese worldview, um, uh, in the and also in understanding of the limitation of materials, right? The continuation of culture and the limitation of materials. So, okay, it brings us to the Malay house. So how does the traditional Malay house look like? Does it look like this? Right? It's not because people analyze the society and climate or simply wanted to build the most economical way. Right? You look at the photographs, right? You can't really generalize. There are some similarities and slight differences, right? So the Malay house is not purely driven by society, not purely driven by climate, all right? Not purely driven by economy, right? The Malay house looks like that because they believe that everything is alive, everything has a soul, right? And if you build recklessly, it's at your own peril, right? So the form is a tangible reflection of an intangible cosmological order. So something similar to um, earlier in the lecture, we were talking about the indigenous people, right, and the connection with the land, right? So in the Malay, the Southeast Asia archipelago, where the Malays are the natives, right, there is also this very beautiful connection with the land, to every tree, to the waters and everything, right? Everything has a soul, which we have to respect, right? So if you build recklessly, right, if I tear down, sorry, let's just talk about it. If I tear down a forest, right, and I build a shopping mall in the middle, right, is you build recklessly at your own peril. That yeah, sometimes because of the economy being so powerful, right? Yeah, such things happen. But once upon a time, they were more respectful of the land and the natural parts of the land, right? So the house must sit harmoniously with its environment, and this environment is spiritual, right? There are souls of things, beings, gods, humans, ancestors. So the house is a cosmological order made tangible. Okay. Sorry, give me a while. Okay. So there is a process. Okay, there's a process. There's an aim, right? So the process itself, like they have to select the site, they have to clear the ground, erect the central post, measure out, build a house, leave the house, live in the house, and rebuild the house if necessary. And when you're selecting the site, right, it doesn't mean that I choose the site, it can be built. There's a certain selection criteria, and the spiritual forces might not allow you to build on that site. Then you have to select an alternative site. So it's possible. Okay. So the aim is a harmony between the sites, the house, and the owners, right? And this state of continuous harmony or fit is called the rasi or the sarasi. Well, which means fitness, suitability, comfortable, right? Padan, sepadan, sesuai, selasi, which is comfortable. So rasi is not just um, comfort for the human occupants, right? But it also means harmony with the cosmos, right? The cosmological, the bigger cosmological context of the house, right? It has three components: values, customs, and order. So for the RASI to be achieved, the values of each of the customary building practices must be respected and implemented in the prescribed order. Okay, here you can watch an overview of the traditional Malay house. Please watch this before you work on worksheet 2. right? So while watching, consider the following. What is the process of building the house? What is emphasized as the important features of the house? And why is the house built this way? Okay, and now for some magic. Malay magic and introduction to the folklore and popular religion of Malay Peninsula, right? Just as a disclaimer, this reference from Skeet's research, right, which is often debatable and often racist, right? However, he does include original sources in the form of 17th century magic books and tries to accurately record what is told to him by various magicians that he interviews for the book, right? So, in the section on building, right, Skits includes the following rituals and process. So when you're selecting the site itself, right, they consult the soil, the color, the fragrance, and even the taste, right? So if there's abundance of gold and silver, right, it can last and benefit the generations that lives in that house itself, right? They observe the surface. It must be the levelness of the surface. They observe the aspect, low to north, high to south, brings about absolute peacefulness, right? Actually, it's very logical. The north-south orientation, um, and rather scientific as well, actually, right? But back in those days, it was termed like magic, right? So you clear the ground, you put 4 sticks, making up a rectangle, call upon the gods, the deities. Um, dig up the soil inside the rectangles, call upon the gods, the deities, and wrap the soil in white cloth, fumigate with incense, sleep and dream. Right? So I think a lot of times if you one obstacle in understanding East West, right, is the concept of gods, right? Because okay, just generally speaking, when when in Christian thought we say that there's one God, right? So then one common um, opposition is that okay, in the Oriental cultures there are many gods, right? But it could be to me personally, it could be a translation issue, right? Because if you understand Oriental philosophy and stuff, you understand that actually they are also referring to one unified body, right? And the gods, right, that it's translated into English might mean deities, right? Deities or angels or guardians. Yeah, these might be better words when we translate into English, right? So because of the um, weakness in translation, right, you think that there is no consistency lah, but actually not true. So for example, in this case, right, if you put 4 sticks in a rectangle, you call upon the deities, right, or you call upon the spiritual guardians, right, it might mean different things, right? Yeah. And also, okay, the other point is that fumigate with incense, right? Then nowadays, if you think about incense, like you might think that oh, it's a spiritual thingy. But incense, right, is like it's like the Dettol. Yeah, it's like the Dettol of that time, you know. Incense actually has a very it has a cleansing function. So when you back in those days when they burn the incense, right? Yes, it's offering to the deities, but it's also um what you call that, desanitizing, disinfecting the site. Yes. So if the compound burns incense on a regular basis, right, it's actually good for the hygiene and the cleanliness of the site. So it's actually scientific. Okay. But over time, when we look back, and if you are misinformed, you might see it as superstitions. So you clear the ground. Um, yep. So I think I'll leave you to read through the steps. Right. When you clear the ground, you form the rectangle at the 4 corners. So in common with houses with the rest of Southeast Asia, 4 is a key concept and manifests in attention to the cardinal directions and the relationship to the house as well as the shape of the house. Right. This concerns also the shape rituals and daily functions within the house. Okay. So there are things like what is a good day time to do that. Right. There are certain charms to recite, certain rituals to go through. right? You have to wait until going through the ritual, making sure everybody has left, then the certain things will follow up before finally putting the post in the ground, that middle post, the most important post in the house, right? So in common with houses with the rest of Southeast Asia, right, the center point, or also called the navel, right, it conveys the central. Okay, by planting that center, right, the center pole, you are starting that center peripheral duality, right? It channels the power of the cosmos and distributes this power. So that central pose, right, is the most important thing in the house. Okay, so measuring the house, um, the measuring activities depend none other than the body measurements of the most important woman of the house, right? So the Rasi is specific to the householder, the Ibu, right? So the female, the mother, the motherly figure is very central to the measurement and the concept. Okay, not the concept, the measurement of the Malay house itself. Okay, so the arm span measurement gives the unit of measurement for the whole house, right? Subdivisions. When you're building the house, there are elements that are commonly used, and there are units of measurement, right? And each unit must be multiplied the correct number of times to give an auspicious proportion or animal, or the harm will befall the house. Okay, that's the belief lah. Okay, and each of these means different things. Oh, this one you can read in your own time. So how the spaces are laid out, generally the house, right, is divided into three parts. You have the Serambi, you have the Rumah Ibu, and you have the Dapur. So as in the rest of Southeast Asia, the three parts division is maintained. Right. So usually this sequence of organizing the space, right, is this sequence or this logic, this is commonly the starting point when you're looking at a house to understand the relationship. So there's one center and three parts. Three parts both on the vertical reference and horizontal reference, and there are four sides, 8 animals, right? So it's like the macrocosmos, the ideology of how the worldview is mapped onto the microcosmos, which is a house, right? And you can go further. You can map this microcosmos into the human as well, actually, right? But we won't go there. We will stop at the house here. So mapping onto the microcosmos, right? So the Serambi is the in-between space between the outside and the inside, right? Where animals and demons can still linger around, right? Because it's in between the space of the humans and the space outside, right? So the Rumah Ibu is where the human stays. Oh, the main activities are like the activities are living, dining, sleeping, right? That will be the main part of the space. And the Dapo at the back, that is for worshipping your ancestors and the deities lah. I'll just say deities and ancestors, right? So the spiritual deities is one part of the spiritual forces that is worship. The other part is ancestors, right? And the worship of ancestors is something that's very central to Oriental philosophy. Okay, so every material used to build a house retains its soul force even after the building, right? That is what is believed. So hard materials have strong soul surfaces and are used where added protection or power are needed, etc. The central pose, right? And the building renews and builds these soul forces, right? And they add carved decorations to offer talismanic protections, especially at the thresholds. Right. So if you pay attention to the form or the structure of the Malay house, right, it is a very centric. So the strongest material, the strongest timber will be used for the central pole, right? The base will be, if there are resources for it, it'll be stone, right? And then they build up, right? And at the peripheral, you'll realize that usually it's the softer material where you can renew and replace. Oh, so there is a very strong centrality and hierarchy. So living in a house, you have the core house, kitchen, covered porch, veranda space, and a walkway. All right. So this is a very simple view of how the interior space inside a Malay house look like. All right. So the form now is determined by things like environment, material, society, economics, culture, religion, foreign influences. All right. That's over time because of the influx of foreign influences. Right. So if you just track the typology of the Malay house throughout the Malay Peninsula, you end up with different forms, right? Because there's foreign influences. So you have the local vernacular, which is already different, right? And then you have the foreign influences, which is also different because you are dealing with a large piece of land, all right? So that marriage of foreign and local, right, becomes a new typology. That's why if you it's very interesting if you track the typology of Malay houses that developed over the Malay peninsula. Is a lot of similarities, but a lot of diversity as well. So it's very beautiful that the diversity that we're talking about. All right, but there are similarities like the three-part divisions, both on a horizontal and vertical um, basis. The rectangular in plan has a very strong hierarchy, not strong, very determined hierarchy of space, right? The plan from the front to the rear. There's a general symmetry in elevation, right? So there's a symmetry, and in some cases maybe asymmetry of the parts, right? To play around the dialogue between symmetry and asymmetry. There's timber walls and atap roofs, right? So this exercise, you can do it in a free time. This is to help you have a kind of prelude to your worksheet 2, which is the Malay house. So examine the drawings on this slide and the next slide and answer the questions, right? Try to sketch the plans and label the functions of each space. Okay, so this is a typical Malay house. Right, so think about what is the difference about planning of each example. Why is the middle part of the house raised? Right? You can consider cosmology, regional differences, and ideas discussed in this lecture. Okay, so with this exercise, actually, you're starting to think about the Malay house, right? Starting to think about worksheet 2 and work on worksheet 2 actually, right? So observations, typology of the house, Malay house spread throughout Malay Peninsula. There are many differences, but also many similarities. So when you are working on worksheet 2, please observe the similarities that is picked up, like three-part division, rectangular plan, hierarchy of spaces, symmetry, asymmetry, and the material use. And because of the material use, but how does it change the form of the house? Okay. Because it's a simple house, you can also take the opportunity to experiment with technology or the tech tools that you have. Because some of the previous batches, some students are are quite adventurous. Yeah, for example, if you want to use a certain 3D software for your design studio, right? When you are working on this assignment, it's actually a good place to start. Yeah, because it's a simple exercise, so you pick a software that you want to use, but you're not familiar with yet, right? And throughout this process, you learn to use it. Yeah. So importantly is to start early for worksheet 2. Yeah, then you can have time to figure out how to use the software, right? And of course, there are students who rely on their strengths, right? Which is they will hand draw or they will use AutoCAD, so on and so forth, right? But feel free to experiment. Oh. So observation, Singapore has never been an isolated place, right? It's always part of a very busy maritime highway, right? Remember Prince Sanggina Utama who landed on Temasek and saw a singer, right? So because of its position, because boats, the maritime trade routes are so important, right? Organically, naturally, Singapore is a very integral part of the network, right? So it's not because of who, then it flourished as a city port, right? In fact, it will almost organically, it is supposed to flourish as a CD pod, right? It just depends on who is administrator making things happen. Yeah, that's all. Okay, so that is the bigger picture. And because sometimes there's certain narratives painted, it's because of this person who made certain things happen, but you are placing too much focus on that person while ignoring the bigger, the larger context, which is the larger order of things, both in a geographical sense and a cosmological sense. Oh, okay, maybe it's a bit hard to understand, but never mind, you get a better idea along the way. Okay, so ideas of forms of the Malay house, right? Their responses to the house to the tropical climate. Pitched roof because of the rainfall, sunshine, because of the need to ventilate, right? Typing on the wind, and how do you orientate? Okay, so there's a climatic adaptation, right? In terms of ventilation, thermal mass, solar gain, control of glare, protection from rain, and environmental cooling. Right, so just a simple house itself, right, it will look different if you are placed in Africa as compared to Southeast Asia. Yeah, because of the difference in climate. Okay, so the principles can be the same, right? But different responses. Okay, then some stuff, some elements that arises because of the responses, like okay, what happens when I want to build a house? I want to keep out the sun, but I want the wind to come in, right? So sun out, breeze in. What kind of element do I derive based on that? You have certain principles like white eaves, louvers, carvings, like open work carvings, and because you have the open work, you have the lattice, right? They make use of the chance to beautify the details, right? You have low open furniture, light furniture, right? So these are the things that um, arises, they are generated when you think about what you want for that space. I want the sun to be excluded, but I want the breeze to be captured. All right, so Malay houses usually they're elevated, right, to tap on the breeze, right, to deal with solar radiation. Because of the pitched roof, you have that space to collect hot air rises, right? So warm air rises. So you have the space to collect that heat for it to dissipate, right? It's raised to deal with to anticipate flooding. Is raised so that you are not in touch with the dampness of the ground. You are raised to protect the inhabitants from bugs, mosquitoes, so on and so forth. You enclose the building in such a way that there's minimal bugs and mosquitoes that can enter the interior space, but at the same time, it's still well ventilated. Okay, so it's always about a balance, right? So for the organization of a kampong, the house and the surroundings, right? Important things is to tap the breeze, right, and to reduce the direct solar gain. Okay, the equilibrium that we are looking at. Okay, so things like airflow, rain. How do we exclude it? How do we allow it to fall? What is the gradient? How do we exclude it, but yet at the same time, right, it doesn't mean that I shut all the windows and suffocate in the house, right? So what is the resultant form of the house? So remember the Malay view is that everything is alive, right? When you think that when you see everything as alive, right, the way that you chop a tree, the way that you harvest a tree, the way that you use timber as a building material changes, right? So the timber frame, right, there are no nails. It relies on a pin and pack system, and there are interlocking slots, right? So some examples you see in the photographs. You wouldn't, if you see something as living, right, you wouldn't want to go and drive nails through it, right? You want everything to be as respectful as possible, right? So in conclusion, we have seen how the tropical Malay house is a manifestation of a cosmological system which incorporated an entire belief system into the building, the product, and the process. Right? It employed various methods aimed at achieving rasi with the site, its deities and the materials, as well as the occupants. So the house becomes a microcosmos of the macrocosmos, right? So you take a picture of the universe as understood by the inhabitants, right, and map it onto a house. So over time, right, these methods develop into a sophisticated body of knowledge about architecture, which was passed on via stories and magic rather than written down in text. Right. So interestingly, right, if you consult the stories and you examine what they do for the magics, right, you actually can get a lot of knowledge about architecture. So it's very different from the Western perspective, right, where everything is just written into canon, into books, right? While in the past, this knowledge may have been dismissed as folk knowledge or primitive, we now know that it represents advanced material and mathematical knowledge, as well as sophisticated knowledge about the environment, right? So all are things we can continue to learn about today, right? On how to live well, right? Now, here and now, and for the future, right? So that's why history is very important to understand it, analyze it. So now we are building a house, 100 years ago, they were building a Malay house. So let's say for Singapore in the current context, if I want to design a HDB, are there any things I can learn from the Malay house? Plenty of things you can learn, and then you map it to the very high density, high rise building, right? And you will arrive at the typology, which you will build, and then you test it out, and then you refine it, right? So that is the benefit of learning from history, lah. Okay, I believe this is the last slide. Yep. So some references if you are interested to read further. Yep. So lecture slides 1A, 1B. These are both can be found in Brightspace under learning materials. So yeah. So I think with that, I'll conclude this week's session. Okay, let me try to exit this. Okay, how do I change the position? Okay, never mind. Yep, you can find both slides under learning materials. Let me see. Yep, under learning materials, go to lectures, right? They should be visible for you already. Lecture 1A and 1B. Then this is where you view 10 canoe films, right? Okay, sorry, not part 4. It's actually part 1, MP4 file. So if you go to assignments, right, you can download the brief for worksheet 1 and 2 already, 10 canoes and Malay House. Okay, so you can download, read it through. If you have questions, we can discuss it in the further in next week onwards lah. Okay. So worksheet 1 and 2, we launched it today. Okay, if you go to go back to content, module information, teaching plan, right? Okay, let's revisit this. Yep. So today we launched worksheet 1. 3 weeks later, you will submit worksheet 1. Okay, this is based on the video and lecture slides about 10 canoes, right? Then 1, 2, 3. 3 weeks later, you submit worksheet 2, which is about the Malay house. So a lot of time for you to work on it, right? More than enough time to work on it, right? So please get started earlier. Oh, because if you need to ask questions or you need to consult, feel free to reach out to me as well. Okay, so I think with that, I'll conclude this week's sharing. So any questions, right? Just drop me a email, then I'll respond to it as early as I can. Okay, so next week, I'll be making announcements. Usually I make it on a Monday or Tuesday. Brightspace announcement, which I will detail what to expect for the week. Right. So next week we'll be meeting face to face in a classroom. Right. So just to reiterate, it will start at 9. Right. The lesson starts at 9 to 12. right? The first hour that is indicated in a timetable, that is actually for asynchronous learning and for you to do your work. Okay, you can work on your worksheets. You can work on your forum participations. You can work on a case study. You can do your own reading. You can prepare for the lectures, right? And you can plan it according to your own schedule. You need not do it from 8 to 9. You can do it on a maybe a Thursday evening, or Wednesday afternoon. It's up to you to manage it. Okay. So thank you for the attention. Right. I'll see you next week in campus. Okay. See you and have a good weekend.